Hey, Dividend Dreamers. Today I'm going to tell you about my story of how I'm up over almost $250,000 since March of 2020, all while playing it relatively safe in the market. Now, you might not believe me, but I'm going to show you proof because it's kind of an unbelievable story. You see, in March 2020, I was 100% in cash. Historically, I've been a more conservative investor with a mix of mutual funds, bonds, CDs, and some growth stocks. But in 2019, I dramatically sold my investments. Today, I'll tell you why I was in cash, the move I made after the crash, the lessons I learned, and the financial celebrity that was personally involved in my decision. I'm not kidding. Let's start with why I was in cash. Now, everybody has their own opinions, but in my opinion, in 2018, we as a collective were starting to go off the rails. We had pulled out of the UN, pulled out of the WHO, started distrusting each other, and we started dismantling every watchdog organization around the world that we have as a nation. And when you're no longer in the know, no longer influential, no longer in the decision-making process, bad things happen. See, you can't have nice things if you're not going to pay up through leadership or effort or money or all of the above. In addition, personally, I earned every penny of my wealth with my own two hands, so I know how much blood, sweat, and tears it took to get here. And I wasn't going to risk my life's work as the risks started to mount exponentially. So in 2019, I very dramatically exited my positions, went mostly to CDs. I was still earning about 3%, but was protected and stable. It was a short-term strategy that I was willing to stay in for as long as I felt like we were on shaky ground. So when the crash happened in March of 2020, I was 100% in cash. And honestly, I was kind of frozen and stunned. Let me show you what that looked like in the market and from an account perspective. So here's the Dow Jones Industrial Average. And in February 2020, all was good in the world. We were at 29.2 in the stock market. And for comparison, my Fidelity account was at 1.07. That's where I had all of my investments just in one account sitting there. So that was February 2020. Then, as you all know, is that on Monday, March 9th, the Dow fell 2,000 points. It was about an 8% drop. And then on March 12th, it set another record by falling another 2,350 points. And so finally, on March 16th, it plummeted another 3,000 points. And so between the middle of February and March 23rd, the Dow lost 37% of its value. And by the middle of March, as we all know, panic was rising. The US went into lockdown. Over 20 million jobs were lost. Meanwhile, here I am back at February 2020 at 1.07. And on March 23rd, I had 1.07. Just lost a couple $1,000s there. And just so that you can see what the next day looked like, 1.07. Again, within a few $100s. Obviously, I could not believe my good fortune. At the same time, my big mistake, and one you can learn from, is that while I was prepared in my CD bunker to weather any storm, I wasn't prepared to make a move quickly if and when there was a drop. I was too slow and only ended up jumping back in around June of 2020. The lesson here is be ready with all of your research, your stock pick targets, and settled cash so you can jump when the time comes. So back to March 2020, I was stunned like everyone else, and my first priority was to make sure my family and friends were safe and try to figure out food and shelter plans for everyone. But after the dust settled into our lockdown state, I started looking around for advice on what to do about this cash situation and the fact that nearly all stocks were on sale. I reached out to my brokerage and spoke to advisors, but didn't find anyone with a holistic vision. Everyone was running around trying to save themselves. So the lesson here is, when the going gets tough, you need to be ready to save yourself. So I was watching TV one day and I saw someone on TV who I thought could help. Jill Schlesinger, the financial advisor to CBS. I realized she had her own podcast and started listening. In it, she invited people to email her with any questions, so I did. I've never done anything like that before, ever, and was sure that nothing would come of it. But, to my surprise, she not only answered my questions, but also had my story on her podcast and radio show in June of 2020. I listened to it over and over, took notes, and thought. Here's what she said. She said that to stay in all cash and cash equivalents, I'd need $3 million at 3% return to get even close to my goal. That scared me. I didn't see a scenario that would get me to $3 million, but the bigger thing that resonated with me was her sage advice, which was, if you want a better return, you're going to have to take on some risk. I really sat with that idea for a while. I was living in a zero-risk situation for so long, but only was getting about half of what I needed in terms of the return. With the larger risk gone, because the market had already done its worst, I started reframing the idea of risk when it comes to an income source. That basically she's right. I can't expect an above-average reward without some level of above-zero risk. That perhaps relying on one main income source, my ability to work, is an even greater risk than spreading the onus onto dozens of proven companies that have been paying steady income for 10, 25, 50 years. That perhaps my most important number to figure out was the percentage yield that represents a signal for risk on how much I was willing to take in order to make. I saw this as a golden, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity and started doing research right away. And in June 2020, I started making massive money moves into the market, buying up cheap forever stocks and more on the dip days. I began my rent-paying fund by opening a separate account in TD Ameritrade, which you can learn about in my video, How I Pay Rent with Dividends. So where am I now? Let's take a look. Now you can find this under the Performance tab in Fidelity, but essentially the top dark blue line represents the balance with investment, and the bottom light blue line represents the balance if you hadn't invested for the period. And you can kind of see where in March my strategy changed. So the total through March through November is 169,000 in terms of an increase, plus 30,000 additional since November in Fidelity, and an additional 40,000 in profit in TD, that new account, since June of 2020 when I started that. And so the total is a gain of $240,000. And if you want to know more detail on what stock I ended up buying as a result of the research, you can see my video on how dividend payouts work, see how much my 1.5 million portfolio drips. Now, what does the future hold? I'm going to stick with this strategy as long and until I see the potential of another extreme event. But then I'll be ready, because I don't like to rely on luck. Success happens when opportunity meets preparation. I'd just like to thank Jill for impacting my decision. You never know how your words will change a mind or a life. And I hope I'm doing right by also paying it forward to you. Thanks for spending time with me today. I hope you enjoyed it. I'd love to know how you did since the market crash in 2020 and what lessons you learned. Maybe it'll help someone else. So please leave those in the comments. Hey, thanks for watching, and subscribe for more regular videos on how to make passive income with dividends. And I'd love to meet you virtually. If you subscribe, leave a comment below saying I subscribed so that I can thank you personally. And finally, remember, I'm not an advisor, so keep in mind these videos are for entertainment and inspiration only. I'll see you on the flip side.